Morning all. Let's have a look at the round 2 encounter from the Sinquefield Cup between Nakamura playing white and against Magnus Carlsen playing black. E4, Magnus Carlsen played E5. After knight F3, knight C6, Nakamura plays bishop B5. So Roy Lopez territory. Let's add a Qf here. And now an interesting move is played by Magnus Carlsen. G6. I mean, this is quite rare to play G6. It's the fourth most popular choice, so usually A6, followed by knight F6, that's second most popular. F5, third most popular, according to Livebook. But G6, for me as a King's Engine player, this makes the game quite interesting, that black is immediately interested in fianchettoing the bishop. I think trying to win the pawn doesn't work because of the Queen D4 reason. Queen D4 here, so that's not a problem. So white continues by castling, and now Magnus plays bishop G7. So there's a focus on that D4 square here by black. C3, A6, bishop drops back. D6, D4. Seems very logical play from white to construct this center. Bishop D7. And now white closes the center. Nakamura plays D5. After knight E7, he takes off that light square bishop. Often in King's Engine positions, it's good for white to take off the light square bishop and try and exploit the light squares after. And now after C4, it does take on the character of a King's Engine defense, except the knight doesn't have to yet block the F pawn. And in fact, it might be attractive to strive in this position to play F5, but in doing so, the E6 square would be significantly weakened, and white could pounce on that E6 square. For example, F5, knight G5 is good for white here. So this next move seems to just stop the idea of knight G5, so F5 is possible. And in fact we see that after knight C3, F5. So a kind of King's Engine where in effect Magnus Carlsen is playing black in a King's Engine type position. Knight D2, knight F6. Quite different in the light square bishops though, being taken off here. F3, now black castles. And now in the King's Engine, the exploitable base of the pawn chain is D6, so white wants to try and undermine D6 in principle, and plays now B4, the idea of C5. Here, it looks as though without the light square bishop, actually the light squares are a bit more vulnerable, and in fact, Magnus strikes at the pawn chain here with C6. Okay, so it actually really discourages C5 now if white's center is about to crumble with C takes D here. That's not very pleasant. So Nakamura plays D takes C6, which allows a kind of an active knight here coming to D4, and it's also hitting the B4 pawn. That's actually protected, and then the knight does pounce now onto D4. Okay, and here bishop B2 is played. If knight B3, then I think black can actually play this. F takes E4, and that could be quite good. Say takes here, knight G4. And this apparently is very, very good for black. White's rooks are not yet connected here, and this is looking very awkward. Just as an example, bishop D2, rook takes F1, and then knight takes B3. Ouch. Or king takes, even worse, just queen F7 check actually, queen F2. So this is very dangerous on the F file basically. So here, caution has to be placed here about the E4 square and F takes possibilities. So bishop B2 was played. And then we see rook AC8, so Magnus striking at that C4 pawn, which we see in some other games in this tournament. That C4 is a bit of an Achilles heel to attack. Knight E2 now, so focusing on D4, so F takes is not such a problem here, because we've got that D4 knight to attack. Magnus plays now knight H5, so protecting indirectly the D4 knight. That's taken. E takes D, and now white plays E takes F5. Okay, one point here, or 2 points. If it's taken by a piece, I think we have the move G4. This could be interesting. Here, for example, knight E4. And even if white isn't winning a piece, I think this is good for white, this particular position here. For example, knight F4, bishop C1. This continuation should favour white if we get this kind of position. So, after knight F4, after E takes F5, it looks as though G4 might not be attractive for black. And if rook takes F5, G4 again, and here, this again, knight E4, this position, having to lose the exchange, potentially, or just bishop C1 here, not maybe knight takes G5 isn't the best, even bishop C1 might be better, and that looks bad for black. So basically, black shouldn't be taking on F5 with a piece, and if he takes with the pawn, then the D4 pawn is vulnerable after knight B3. This looks bad for black after this, taking that D4 pawn. There isn't too much compensation here for black. So Magnus actually just plays knight F4, so offering a pawn here, sacrifice. If F takes G6, this should be okay after queen F5. Black does seem to have strong pressure here in this position, for example, knight D3, for example, and it looks as though there's adequate compensation in this sort of position. That knight on D3 controls the E1 square. It looks quite dangerous. If white has to be very careful here. So okay, in fact, Nakamura gave up the pawn with F6 here. So it gave the pawn back. Interesting decision. So I think the engine choice was FG, but yeah, white would be under pressure. I think F6 is interesting as well. Bishop takes F6 was played. G3, kicking that knight. Check. And here now, there are some light square weaknesses actually with G3, and in fact, it seems King H1 is not ideal either, as well as King G2. Knight G5, and these squares are quite vulnerable. And in fact, bishop E5 takes G3 is a safety net for black, even if D4 is vulnerable here. For example, in this position, knight B3. Oh well, there's rook takes C4 there, so it's not even possible to go for D4 that quickly here. So I think King G2 or King H1, they're about the same actually from a technical engine point of view. Knight G5, and it looks as though this is very dangerous now, at least for a perpetual check, to help black get perpetual check possibilities. Queen B1, attacking G6, the king protects G6. Queen D3, lending support for F3, and also bishop D4 now is on the cards. But here is where Magnus reacts quickly with bishop E5 here. So D4 can be used as ballast to gain time for an attack against the white king. So for example here, if bishop takes D4, this wasn't played, then check, and bishop takes G3 is dangerous for white. For example like this. And the attack is quite good there. So after bishop E5, rook AE1 was played, and now Magnus basically forces a perpetual check scenario by playing bishop takes G3, stripping the white king of safety here. If he had gone queen H3 check, I think it's about the same thing anyway here. Bishop takes G3 is still perpetual check time, but in the game we see bishop takes G3 here and perpetual check time like this. So yeah, I thought the game was slightly interesting to have a quick look at. I thought the opening was quite novel. So if you're playing black here and want a novel system against royal players, G6 seems to be the fourth most popular choice actually. So yeah, it seemed like an interesting game. Although the d4 pawn for black seemed vulnerable at some stage, it seems Magnus created direct play against white's king just in time coming up. And this was quite an ingenious pawn sack here after knight f4. So these are quite interesting variations on fg for white to be a pawn up, but black has certain activity in the position, which makes it look unpleasant. It looks like the octopus knight of the classic Karpov-Kasparov game covered on this channel. So yeah, that was avoided, and it seems if the knight wasn't kicked here with g3, I think still, you know, white's under pressure. Say king h1, bishop g7 or bishop e5. White's still under pressure. Black might be coming in with queen f5 and queen h5 to make things look a bit scary, to get some counterplay on h2 here. Okay, so perpetual check in the end. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.